Hi there, I'm Matt Allington and welcome to Power Query Magic. And my favorite Power Query feature is the refresh all button.
All right, welcome, Matt. Thank you for coming on the show.
Thanks, Win. Thanks for inviting me all the way from sunny Perth, I'm sure.
Indeed, it is actually sunny today. I went camping on the weekend, absolutely freezing, lashed it down with rain.
Oh,
Oh,
really?
horrible, absolutely horrible. So we're basically, I think our camping day's done, over it.
Yeah, well, we've had our fair share of rain here in Sydney, as I'm sure you're aware. So,
Yeah.
what do you think?
How's the wet weather affecting your golf game?
There's lots of things affecting my golf game. I don't think it's the weather.
I mean,
So, yeah, my golf's pretty
i-
ordinary at the
is
moment,
is is the
unfortunately.
golf a new venture, or have you always played a little bit?
I think I'm not always, definitely. I'm not sure if I'm 3 years in or four
Oh,
years. It's one of those two. And that's a funny thing, maybe not funny, just interesting observation. When you work for yourself, like I work for myself now, I work from home. In my little box, and I sit in here. I've been sitting in here for 8 years, and so there's just no. You need a reason to get
yeah.
out, and also to get a bit of sunshine. I don't go to the office regularly, and so golf is a real escape for me because I can go out there, I get the sunshine, talk to friends. Um, Unfortunately, if you're a little bit stressed, it can be a pretty hard. It's a pretty hard game to play at the best of time. But if you're carrying a little bit of stress, it makes it
Yeah,
harder,
yeah,
and then it can make the stress
yeah,
worse. But yeah, so yeah, I took it up because I had time
yeah.
now. Um, the other thing is it's a sort of a game that if you play on the weekend, it's pretty hard to get around to get a spot. Whereas I tend to work on the weekend and then take a little bit of time off during the
Okay,
week.
yeah, yeah.
So that works for me
So
as well.
if you're sort of playing with a couple of random folks, making up a foursome or something like that, and people go, "So, Matt, what do you do?" So what's the pitch? What's the elevator pitch?
What's the answer?
Yeah.
I normally tell people I'm in data analytics, so I help people with data analysis. I also train people to how to build those data analysis tools. So that's what I normally say. And most people go, "Oh yeah, that's nice." And then I say, "Well, do you know Excel?" And they go, No, not really." I say, "Okay, well, it's kind of like Excel, but
Yeah.
different." Of course, it depends on who you talk to, but a lot of people, as you could imagine, a lot of people you see out on the golf course midweek, they're not your 30
Yeah.
somethings who are sort of fairly fresh out of uni. They're people at the other end of their career, and so perhaps the tools that we use and are using are not we're not on the top of their list of things that they do.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, but even my family, I'm not sure that my family, not all of them anyway, really know what I do. They just know I work for myself and do something with data.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
every now and then I build stuff that I share with them so they get a bit of a insight. I'm sure they wonder how you can make money doing that sort of stuff. So, well, I guess they don't see the back end, but one of my long-term family tools that I built was a Kris Kringle allocation tool in Excel.
Okay.
It's absolutely horrible, but I've been doing it for like 15 or 18 years now. Every
Nice.
year I just put in the names, hit randomize,
Yeah. Oh,
all the names get shuffled up, automatically sends an email to everyone with a little text file saying,
nice.
Matt buys for Kathy.
Excellent.
And
So is that little bit of
so
VBA
yeah,
in the background there, sending that email out? Oh,
there's a lot of EBA in the background to make that all happen. And I'll tell you what, through that process, one thing I've learned is that the randomization function in Excel, or my application of the randomization function in Excel, is not that random.
right.
And so my algorithm has been fundamentally flawed over the last 15 years. And all of those complaints from family members saying that they keep buying for the same person, they were exactly correct. And so I've, uh, I've I've deployed a new approach this year using some Power Query actually.
Okay,
You
but
know, interesting segue. But
isn't one of the Power Query, wasn't there some sort of, have they changed it now that there was some sort of issue with you couldn't really do a random number in a column?
yeah, I'm sure. And so I actually don't use randomization now. I had to get some help. So I've got some pretty smart Power Query friends, and someone wrote me a handwritten piece of M code that quite literally builds all of the permutations of X buys for Y
Okay.
out of an audience of 12 or 15 people. I mean, just I don't even understand it. I look at it and I don't even understand
It
it.
works.
But I was able to lift that and to take all the unique combinations of X buys for Y, in a group of 12 people or whatever it
Right.
is that I've got. And then what I ended up doing was I looked back over history and to say how many times has this person bought for that person, and then basically assign a score to each of the possible outcomes,
Right.
and then sorted them, and then select the possible scenario with the lowest score being the one that will satisfy most people for having bought for someone else the least. I'm not sure whether that translates too well into an audio discussion, but
Is
yeah,
this
that's
where
what
the
I've done.
sort of one of the foursome just walks off to another group when you're telling them this story?
Yeah, yeah. No, I don't share this on the golf course, but
No, but that's
um,
called. I think that's termed over engineering, perhaps.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess you could put you put the names in the
Yeah,
hat and draw it
yeah,
out. Is that what you
something
mean?
like that.
I mean, the trouble with that's fine when everyone's in the room
Yeah,
on a certain date, but when people are distributed around the
yeah.
place,
But you
I mean,
helps learn though, doesn't it?
I,
Helps learn these new techniques if you've got something to, you know,
no,
something fun to
absolutely.
play
I
with.
think it's actually it's a fundamental point actually that if you want to be good at any of these tools, we talk about Power Query today or the M language, but more broadly Power Query or Power Automate or any of these
Yeah,
tools, you need something meaningful to do with it, and because you have to practice, you cannot get good by conceptualizing what's happening. Um, and I use this actually I use golf as an example when I teach people in my classes, and I say, well, I got this great Tiger Woods book that my neighbour lent me. It's got the nice picture of Tiger on the front. He tells you what he does, and I read the book front to back, and I was no better golfer because I hadn't done any practice.
yeah, yeah,
And it's the same with Power Query. You must do it, and if you have to do it, you may as well do it use something that you're going to get some value from. Everyone's got something in their personal life that they're going to get some value from. And so at the moment I'm working on the River Murray floodwater data, and I've built this report on the fly over the last 3 days or so, and it's horrible. I mean, I know the techniques, of
yeah,
course, but it's helping me structure and think about, well, what are the processes that I follow when I'm taking data from multiple data sources that is different, or a different starting point, but then ultimately I need to put it into a table that has been harmonized, a fact
yeah.
table in this case. How do I do that? Do I store it? Do I write the interim results into CSV and then just load them up, or what? And I still don't know the answer, but I started on this journey, and I'd like to backtrack a bit, and I tend to go back and fix things incrementally when I make
Yeah,
mistakes.
yeah.
But it takes time. It takes time, and then hopefully you're better and smarter for it, right? So next time you do it, you don't make quite as many mistakes, and edit,
Yeah.
repeat.
And isn't that the beauty?
That's how
Isn't
I
that the
do it.
beauty of this stuff now, though? This tech, that the incrementalness nature of it, that you can just iterate and keep going. You don't have to plan something out for
Yeah,
6 months and sort of, you just get your hands in and start
I th-
playing.
I think so. Although it is interesting because I'm not classically IT trained. I don't know whether you
No,
are, Win, or not,
no.
but so I'm sure if you go to do a computer science degree, they would teach you about, I don't know, planning and I don't know, building entity diagrams of what it is that you want to build, or whatever. There must be some techniques that they use to plan ahead before they actually go ahead and
Yeah.
build. And I mean, that's not me. The last thing I want to do is plan. Although to be fair, the last thing I want to do is document a plan. I do plan,
Yes.
but I do it in my head.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
I think about what do I want to do? Do I know what I want to do? But you don't always think through the issues. You don't even know what the issues are that are going to come down the track
No.
until some point in time. So, yeah, so I do wonder whether if I had more classical training, whether I would make less mistakes. Yeah,
I don't know. From my experience, having we've been sort of consulting building solutions in Excel for 15 years now, and it was always a case of there were these old, bigger systems that were always export to Excel at the end of the day.
Yeah,
And those, like one of the spreadsheets I built, somebody tried to sort of convert it into a proper IT system, and the planning stage cost twice as much as the actual tool that they'd been using for 2 years that I built in Excel.
Yeah.
And they never got anywhere with it. They just carried on. Excel's working. Let's just stick with it.
yeah,
And it's sort of iterative, because it was quick and iterative, and people don't know what they want until they see what they want. You can and same with Power BI, it just applies on the same foundations, I think.
yeah, absolutely.
So, Port Pirie High School, South
Oh my goodness.
Australia.
Where did you get that? Where did you get that little blast from the
What did
past?
young Matt think he'd be doing?
How did you know I went to Port Pirie High School?
The internet's an amazing thing.
You've been doing some research. I'm hoping there's nothing. I'm hoping there's nothing on the internet about me being at Port
That's
Pirie
about
High
it.
School.
That's about as far as I go. So, where is Port Pirie? Just sort of for people's benefit.
So it's about 2.5 hours north of Adelaide.
Okay.
So straight up the peninsula there, up towards Port Augusta.
Yeah.
So
And-
it's I was going to say mining town, but it's not a mining town. It's got this, a smelters there, so it's
okay.
an industrial
town.
industrial town. Yeah, BHP.
But
What
was on Matt's mind back in
Why was I? Why was I?
Or
there?
what would you
was
think?
on
What
my
did you think
mind?
you'd end up doing? What was the dream?
I didn't know. I mean, interesting. I met my first computer at Port Pirie High
Okay.
School. It was I don't know, a HP something with a cassette
Right,
drive.
yeah,
Does everyone
yeah.
even know what one of those things are? And I remember going in and getting a library book and programming. Like had code in it, basic code, and actually writing out this code after school in this HP compact computer or
Right,
whatever it was called.
Yeah.
And so this is going back. This has got to be 77, something like that, 78
yeah.
orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
And then we got an Apple II.
Okay.
I think it was an Apple II computer at school. Used to be part of the computer club and the chess club. So I guess I was always very logical thinker, and I loved that computer. And so I guess I don't know that I explicitly thought I would end up doing anything in this space. I mean, I really spent certainly 20 years not working with computers, although it was always an interest of mine.
It's a weird split then, to going from, you got that little sort of scent or taste for that sort of world, but then life takes you down another path sort of thing.
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, I guess I followed the opportunities that were there. I worked at Woolworths for many years, and then Coca-Cola for 25 years. And I mean, I always used the tools that we had when I had an opportunity. I was actually, as I was thinking about this chat today, so when I was at Coke and I was a rep, I wanted to get data. Do you remember the old computer paper that was blue and white stripes with the holes down the side?
Yes.
So we had a mainframe computer, and so we used to get all these printed reports of all of our sales from our customer, and that was a little bit too complex for me. So I used to log into the computer, and I discovered this software that they had that would take the spool file, right? So the output that they were going to send to the computer, And this software would actually convert that output into more of a tabular data. And it was very, very similar to Power Query. It was quite remarkable. I don't remember what it was
Okay.
called, but you used to, I think these pages were like 80 characters wide, I want to say. And you could sort of say in column 60, if you get a letter B, then ignore that line.
Right. Okay.
And then, on row 15, whatever the characters are, that becomes the header. It was very similar.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so often they would use the piping character to separate the data. And so if there's a piping character, that's the beginning of a column. This software was so similar to Power Query. It was amazing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sort of a bit of a flashback
Yeah.
with you asking that question. So yeah, even when I was not working with computers, I guess I really loved data. I was always doing something.
Did you sort of lean, because you, from sort of scanning down your profile and from what you've chatted to you before, there'd have been like lots of roles managing staff, and I'm not sure what's involved in a rep role as well, but the core of it isn't data, but you're saying you liked getting into that a bit when you had the opportunity.
Yeah, I mean, I've certainly had a different range of roles, and now working for yourself, I think, and you would know being in business yourself, when that you sort of have to be a bit of everything. You have to learn a lot of skills.
Yeah.
I mean, in a lot of the formal roles that I had, even though I wasn't doing traditional IT stuff, one of the things I was successful in is actually using data to my advantage. And I think even more than that, I was able to get the data during a period when it was very difficult to get the data.
Right.
And so I think if you look at Power Query today and Power BI, I think those tools make the data accessible to the average business user in a robust way.
Yeah.
And in many ways, one of the skills that helped me be successful was that without those good tools, I was still able to get the data.
Yeah.
So by getting extracts, a bit of VBA, so VBA, if you think about it in a way, Power Query is a substitute for VBA. They're completely different software.
Absolutely.
But what people used to use VBA for, what people like me used to use VBA for, was to cleanse data to get it to a stage where you could work on it. And so even though those two products are very different, they're substitutes for each other.
Yeah.
Another example is Access. Now, I used to use Access because there were things that I couldn't do easily in Excel that Access would do so much better. And so a good example would be, I was in Coke, and I was doing customer management, and the customer used to send me, we're talking advanced now, this is past 1977.
Right.
So they used to send me a floppy disk,
We've
three and a quarter
skilled up.
inch floppy disk, had a CSV file, I'm sure, of all of the sites that they operated. There'd be 600 sites in Australia.
Yeah.
And then we had our master data that I could get the extract. And so I had to work out which ones were missing.
Yeah.
Now, you could load them both up into Excel and then do a VLOOKUP and copy and paste it down, and that worked. But because I kept getting these updates every month, I thought there's got to be a better way of doing this. And so the solution I came up with was to use Access. So I used to load my tables in Access. I used to load the customers' tables in Access, and then I'd build a query in Access that would do left outer join, tell me, do a right outer join, and tell me which one's missed. I mean, you had to teach yourself all of this, right? Because I didn't know anything about Access.
I was going to ask
when I started.
So I was going to ask, how did you come up with that? Were you looking over somebody's shoulder? Was there someone sat next to you, or did you just go,
I don't know.
to find out?
I guess it's probably the latter.
Right. Yeah.
But I don't really know. I mean, I tend to be very curious about stuff where, I'll read something and I'll say, that's interesting.
Yeah,
that's an interesting solution to a problem that I don't have. And then I just file that away.
Yeah. Look.
And then in literally years down the track, when I come up with a problem, somehow I can just recall and I might not know exactly, where or when the solution was available,
Yeah,
but
yeah,
I think because I have a very logical, structured mind, and because of my collective experience over time, I just sort of petition stuff. I don't know. I guess that's the way the brain works, right?
yeah.
You you tend to structure your thinking. You can always link a personal experience with a similar personal experience, maybe that gave you a similar outcome. And yeah, I guess I've just been able to do that with software, business software,
Yeah.
data manipulation tools, and the way data works.
You mentioned about access as well, and I tweeted about this yesterday. I was commenting on something. Sort of what my little epiphany moment with Power Pivot was. A client had a massive text file. It was a 4 GB text file from the tax office with all their tax transactions, and it was too big for an Access. Access could only process a 2 GB text file, so I brought it into Excel. And the tables had turned. It was like, oh, the
Yeah, it
file's
used to be
too
the other way
big
around.
for Access, so let's bring it into. And this was like, and like everyone was just, I was blown away myself. It took about half an hour to load, but it was just like, wow, this is, I've suddenly got this extra superpower thing now. It's awesome.
Yeah, yeah.
Just really good. And so what was your first sort of inkling around sort of, Power Pivot being sort of, game changing, as it were? And
The big, or my first experience was when I was still at Coke, and I read Rob Collie's book.
yeah,
That was the original book, Power Pivot. I don't think Power BI was even a thing then.
no,
I'm sure I've probably got it here.
I think I'm going to bring my copy out as well, just
Tax formulas for Power Pivot.
tax formulas for Power
But
Pivot.
yeah, I don't have that one. But yeah. So sorry. The reason I said that was the second one was that, little known fun fact, I used to print that book in Australia under the authority of Bill Gellan, and that book was too big for the standard size Australia Post envelope.
Right.
So I used to print it 14% smaller in order to be able to fit it into an envelope
Okay.
so that I could ship it around Australia. So,
Nice.
but anyway, that was the first book.
Does
So I
that mean
read.
that my version that I've got here is 14?
No, you're. I don't know where. It depends where you got it from. I
Well, I
guess. So, but that was the book that. I don't know. It changed everything for me. I literally remember reading that book in bed at night, and it just being absolutely jaw dropping. Couldn't believe that this stuff was possible. And I'm not sure whether I started to read Rob's blog first or after that, or I certainly was in touch with him around that time. So I was running business intelligence for Coke in Asia Pacific at the time, and we had a Microsoft shop, so we were using Excel, basically Excel with a thin connection through to Analysis Services multi-dimensional
Oh, okay.
on-premise server, and I was trying to, and we also had enterprise edition of SharePoint, which we purchased in order to get Pro Clarity back in the day.
Okay. Yeah, rings a
And
bell.
I was, yeah. So Pro Clarity was a very good piece of BI software back in 2012 thereabouts. Microsoft bought them, was going to bundle it as part, and then back in the day they weren't really sure what they were doing. Well, no, that's not. I didn't mean it to come out that way. They weren't really sure. I think on the destination they were starting to bring these technologies into Power Pivot for Excel, SQL Server Analysis Services, SharePoint Enterprise Edition.
Yeah.
So I don't know if everyone sort of listening would know this, but you used to be able to build a Excel Power Pivot workbook with a tabular model involved, publish it to SharePoint Enterprise Edition, and have SharePoint automatically refresh it for you without
Okay.
you doing anything.
Right.
And then you could then go into PowerPoint and embed the Excel file from SharePoint Enterprise Edition and have it interact live in a PowerPoint presentation. This was 2014,
Right.
right? So 8 years
We've
ago.
come full circle.
So we've come full circle. Yeah, so I'm not sure what it was, whether it was when James Phillips joined or whatever, or whether I don't know. I mean, I guess it's very similar to what you and I were saying before, where you start on a journey, you do so with your eyes wide open, you think you're making good decisions, but you learn as you go. And I mean, and so I suspect Microsoft at some point in time came to a decision that pursuing the Power Pivot as the primary game was not the best option. There would have been many reasons. Technology disconnect was one. I mean, you remember Power View, right? So Power View, I never liked Power View,
No.
but you can, if you go back and look at it now, you can see what they were trying to do.
Yeah.
But they were hamstrung by the tabbed interface in Excel, by the technology, the visualization technology, and so then I think, I actually don't know if this is true or not, but certainly, definitely is true, as Microsoft started Power BI, like building a brand new shell. So because it's three things, right? It's ETL, which is now Power Query.
Yep.
It's data modeling DAX, which is the analysis services engine, and then it's the visualization layer. Those three things make up what Power BI is today. And they certainly had us started building it, and then they stopped and threw it away and started again. That happened.
Okay.
So now I don't know whether they were using Silverlight as the visualization. Well, they certainly use Silverlight
For Power
in
View.
Power View.
Yeah.
So I'm 99% positive that they actually started Power BI and then stopped and then basically rebuilt again, because they just learnt stuff about the technology and the deployment methodology and all those sorts of things.
And I guess new techniques, new technology comes along, within half an hour of starting something, you go, oh, this is much better. And you just chop and change and okay. Wow.
So sometimes starting again is the most efficient and effective way of doing it.
Yeah.
Now, if you look at Office, the other thing about, I remember talking to Rob Collie about this, because Rob Collie was a program manager on the Office team, and he was doing Excel at the time that Power Pivot was being done. That's the link that he had with these technologies. And I remember him saying that one of the issues that they had was that they were trying to work at a pace with these new technologies, Power Pivot, but the Office team, for good reasons, the Office team's like 35 years old, right? Or the technology footprint's 35 years old. And so they had a very slow, structured release cycle. So, Office 2013, 2016, 2020. Whereas, the rate of change of this brand new product was so great that there's just no way that was going to work.
Yeah.
So almost by separating those two things apart, they were able to take off at a different pace. And then this also comes back, you remember this well, Win, is that, back in the day, Office, there was a 32-bit, and then they developed a 64-bit, and there was no IT section IT department in the world that would go to 64-bit, because all of the plugins, particularly if you're in finance, you had all these SAP add-ins and stuff, they only worked for 32-bit. And there wasn't one piece of software in the Office suite that needed 64-bit. And so basically no one upgraded it until Power Pivot came along. And then if you only had the 32-bit of Excel, you ended up with, I think it was a 2 gigabyte limit file size, which seems like a lot at the time, but with early adopters doing poor data modeling design, it got it got pretty slow pretty quickly, and
they did have Power Pivot was pretty buggy. It was awesome, but it was pretty buggy, and I know that the Excel teams spent a lot of effort rehashing it to make it sort of a bit more, production ready.
The irony is 2010 was rock solid. 2010 was rock solid.
But that was with the Power Pivot.
That was a
add-in.
plugin.
Yeah, okay.
That was as an add-in, and as soon as they bundled it with Office, they lost that ability to do the patching and the rapid development and changes and stuff. That was also the version that they renamed the measure and renamed it calculated fields.
Was that a Rob Collie thing? Did he do that as well?
No, he hated it.
Okay, we'll let him off that one.
He hated it. Yeah. So they went to calculated fields, but it was no doubt someone in the Excel team. The Excel team, love them. 35 years of pleasure. But they're pretty set in their ways on some things. And naming conventions is one.
Yeah, yeah.
It's not my favorite thing about Excel.
No.
The old chestnut is the when they took away the Power Query menu, which was my favorite tab in the entire,
Yep.
and they took it away, and they hid Power Query under Get Data
Yeah.
or Get and
Yeah.
Transform Data,
I
whatever
know.
it was that they were.
I've been
Get
campaigning
and
for get that
Transform.
ribbon back for ages. I'm falling on deaf ears most of the
But
time.
but have you noticed that not the ribbon, but there is a ribbon now called Query? I noticed
Oh,
this
when you
like
clicked
2 weeks
inside the
ago.
table?
Yes, there
Yeah.
is a new ribbon called
Oh,
Query, but
it's been around for a while. Like it's just one of those ones that people don't notice. It has been around for a
yeah,
while.
but they won't call it Power Query, because that would be backtracking too far
Yeah, yeah.
and admitting.
Well,
I don't know. I mean,
it's just hiding this. It's just hiding some of Excel's greatest ever features under the hood somewhere, and it's just
yeah.
yeah,
I mean, in the defense of the Excel team, what they say is that they want the naming conventions to be process based. So what are you going to do? And therefore, that's why they say get and transform, because that's the task that you want to execute.
yeah,
But I don't know. I just think you've got to compromise a little bit. I remember we go back to that cycle where you're talking about upgrades in Excel. Excel 2007, 2010. The first thing I would do is open it and go through those menus like
yeah, yeah,
with a hawk eye, trying to find what's new
yeah.
in here. And so, a new tab saying Power Query. Wow, that's going to get some attention. What's Power Query? And then you go and do some investigation.
And the number of people when I'm running training and you show them that this is the section that's Power Query, they just like never even glanced at that.
Yeah.
No idea.
And you still find that today?
Yeah, totally. 15% tops.
15's the number. I've been quoting 15%
Yeah.
for 5 years.
I thought it would have gone
and
up by
I've
now.
never no, it's never changed.
No.
So the people that come along and want trainings still don't know what Power Query is.
And I've got no empirical evidence, but I've no grasp of the fact that anybody who sees it doesn't love it and doesn't start using it. I don't see anybody who goes, "Oh, that's nice," and then just ignores it. I think everybody.
I think VBA is a bit beyond some people.
Oh,
that's why not everyone's taken up VBA. But I don't think that's true. And in fact, I think Power Pivot and DAX is also harder to learn. And it doesn't mean that it can't be learned, but you just have to make a bit of a commitment, and you'll have to do probably some formal training and certainly some learning to get started.
Yes.
And if you want to be good, you probably need to do some structured training.
Yeah.
But Power Query, I think you can benefit from structured training, but I think you can teach yourself a little bit easier than you can with the other products.
Yeah.
You might not be an expert without training, but you can get 90% of the benefits without doing anything, I reckon.
Yeah, you can get started, and the thing I love about it is the sort of shallow learning curve. You can just do a basic little bit, see what's going on, and then do a little bit more. And I always have to remind myself that my full-time job is learning this stuff so I can teach people and train and develop it for clients who are paying some good money for getting stuff done quickly and in the right way. Whereas most people have got a proper job to do, and the tech is just supporting them when they've got time to have a look at it. And they're only dipping in and out. And it does take, some people love this stuff like us. We just get into we get a buzz from learning it. But some people are just like, I just want to get my job done, and I know how to do it this way, and I can do it in half an hour. Or you're telling me I've got to spend 5 hours struggling with something to get it done quicker in 2 months' time. Well, I just don't have the time. It's that sort of,
I still think Power Query, though, if there's going to be a tool that will give them a quick return for your effort, I think the toolbar's laid out well. You don't have to learn any of the M language if you don't want to. Certainly not required. And I think you can do a lot of very good, simple, common tasks very quickly and easily. But once again, a little bit of learning is not going to go astray. But I mean, when we teach Power Query we'll often do just like a file combine and compare. And often people will say, that would save me 4 hours a week,
Yeah,
just that alone.
yeah,
Um, I think the trick is then to take that 4 hours a week and reinvest it in learning what else can you save. Although
yes.
not everyone's so inclined. Some people, I distinctly remember doing some training for a particular company, and a number of people in the room were really quite threatened by what it was that we were
Oh,
covering,
okay.
because they'd built their career on the manual processes of solving these problems,
Yeah, yeah.
and not everyone that it's common to say, well, if I only didn't have to do all this prep, I could spend this time on analyzing or adding value. But not everyone can do both. Some people are just really good and solid at doing the work required to get it to a point of analysis, and that if they had to stop doing that and start adding some other data analytics, maybe they're just not cut out for that.
Yeah,
I think
true.
it can be quite threatening for some people.
Yeah, yeah. And I guess it's there's the scenario where that time you get freed up. I don't. It just seems that there is a never-ending pipeline of work. So
Yeah,
I think it is I generally think it is people really feel that, but I don't think it's a real scenario because it just more work comes in. It never ends.
yeah,
So, we're
yeah,
meant to all be doing 2 days, for the last 30 years when computers got invented. We're meant to be doing 2-day weeks or nothing now. So,
yeah. It was pretty common for people to say in my training classes, I'm going to be out of a job, and I've never seen it.
nah.
You're never out of a job.
And
There's always going to be something, isn't there, to
you
take
just,
up that space.
and if you're doing this stuff, I think you just become more valuable, because if you leave, then they're going to have to, get somebody in, or, if you want to leave, then you're more marketable with
Yeah.
these skills. I
Mm.
wish, I haven't seen it yet, but I would wish that nowadays when job ads come out, an Excel is a requirement, that those job ads had a bit more, were a bit more specific. And certainly for analyst roles and things like this, it should be, Power Query, Power Pivot,
Yeah.
those sorts of things. It would be, I think,
Yeah.
beneficial.
There's another interesting observation that I have made, or think about sometimes, with these new tools, Power Query, Power Pivot, or Power BI, whatever. There's a lot more citizen-built production systems out there today than perhaps there were in the past. And I think, well, actually, if I could restate that, they've always been out there, but they've always been Excel.
Yeah.
And so now they're this new suite of tools, even if Excel is still the shell. And I think almost the better you were at Excel, and I know a guy at Coke, like he was a VBA genius. All of his solutions, you'd open them up and they'd be moving, the page would be moving around and buttons flashing, click me, click me.
Yeah.
But the problem was, as soon as he moved on, it was completely unsupportable
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
because he was the only person in the world that knew how it worked.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so then you'd have to, it's like doing a hard disk wipe when you had a new employee. You literally had to start again because it was so complex. And I wonder whether the same is going to be true for some of these data modeling, Power Query type tools, where I think if it's simple and you've got well designed Power Query, I think anyone could take it up. But if the more complex it gets, the harder it is for someone else to pick it up.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree. And it is a trade-off between what, if something's built from let's say it's a third-party tool, built, all coded in the background, all black box, locked down, no one has this expectation that somebody else can pick it up and tweak it.
Yeah,
Because I've built stuff for clients in the past that I've spent 3 months building, okay? And then they've gone, oh, it's a little bit complicated. How do we change this? And it's just that you don't. I know it's built in Excel, but it is not for you to go playing about with. It is a tool that you built to a spec, and you shouldn't be going in the back end and tweaking it.
But do you document the design and the operation manuals and stuff like that for those types of standalone Excel products?
Not in terms of the actual, I guess the best approach is to try and document within the code itself, because the external documents just are out of date within 5 minutes.
Yeah.
And it's more a case of, just giving enough explanation to somebody who has the skill set to assist them, point them in the right direction, point out any of the pitfalls. And I think that's often the way it's going to go with, the Power BI solutions as well, is that I've seen people spend days documenting stuff, and it's externally, all these screenshots, click here, click that, click this, but it should all be done internally and maintained that way, is my view, with a overarching bit of documentation about, the general process. Otherwise, it's just out of date. But
so I think if you're a professional and you're building these tools professionally and you're doing those things, then that's great. But the risk is when you have citizen developers who have a lot of enthusiasm above the formal training on how to do it in a robust way, and particularly if they build badly designed models, then even if you are a professional, it's pretty hard to come in and fix it up.
But is it a step? So is Power BI then? I'm feeling that Power BI is a bit of a step towards bringing the IT world and the Excel world together. And Microsoft spent, the last couple of years really sort of, I guess, hardening the IT enterprise side of this. And I often hear the sort of IT type folks on podcasts and things talking about, how are we going to trace this? How are we going to work out the lineage of this, that, and the other, and where this is linked, and sort of getting quite concerned about it. But they have actually implemented a lot of functionality to try to negate some of that risk, which was always there, because it was just being done in Excel and Access databases. And now it's a bit more coordinated. So it's the worlds are coming together a little bit more.
Yeah, I think so. And in the past, businesses would build Access solutions and they would use them. And then if they wanted IT, if it became a process or a system that needed to be elevated to an enterprise level, IT would literally delete the database and build it again for $1 million.
Yeah.
Whereas I think Power BI has the potential of there being some sort of migration path. So, depending on where the data is coming from, you could go into Power Query and repoint all the tables that were coming from consolidating CSV files and point them to a SQL database. And that way you get to keep all the transformation, or you can push it into the database, you get to keep the DAX, you get to keep the reporting stuff. It's a very different migration from developer or from citizen developer solution to enterprise solution, if you want to go down that track. Or don't make that migration, just keep it as an operational citizen developed solution, perhaps with a little bit of that structure that you talked about that used to be totally reserved for enterprises in the past.
I do think there's this, one of the key things, and I'm biased, you're going to be biased. People need training in some of this, just when they're starting to implement this stuff, just because it puts them off on the right foot. I've helped people who have been watching videos that are 6 years old and doing the wrong thing and going off down the wrong path. And people who've been playing with Power BI for 3 years, and then they come on training and they go, you must have had the same thing,
Yeah, absolutely.
So everybody can benefit, I think. So, so your blog post, okay? I scrolled back through, did a lot of scrolling, a lot of blog posts. I don't know if it was your first one, but the first one I came across was 2014 on Power Query. Consolidate multiple Excel files in SharePoint using Power Query, February 2014. So
that's amazing.
Does that sound about? Were you blogging? Did you do anything on Power Pivot Pro before that, or was that your first?
About the same time. Was it? Would you say February 2014?
Yeah,
was that first one, was it? Yeah. So I was still at Coke. No, I couldn't have. Interesting. because I wouldn't have had my company set up. Well, if I did, hadn't told Coke, because I actually left Coke in April
Oh,
2014. But it
okay.
was about that time that perhaps did set up my website and I started to do my planning. I distinctly remember
Right.
coming back at the start of 2014,
Okay.
and I was ready to move on.
Yeah,
So
yeah, yeah.
so I could have had my website up by then. But yeah, so I left Coke on, I believe it was the 24th of April, the day before Anzac Day 2014. I did a lot of blogging on Rob's website for
Right.
a couple of years, actually.
Yeah.
Every 2 weeks, certainly for the first 12, maybe 24 months, I don't remember. If I, my one regret I have is that I didn't do enough blogging on my website early on.
Okay.
So, I was trying to, I mean, back in the day, no one had heard of me. I hadn't written my books. I hadn't
Yeah, yeah.
spoken at conferences and things like that. So I was deliberately, using Rob's blog as a way of getting some exposure, and it was good for him as well. I would give him some content. But yeah, I vaguely remember writing that, and this is back in the day when there was very little content around about
Yeah.
Power Query.
Yeah.
It's very early on, and you didn't have things like automatic generated functions and file combine automated, and so you actually had to really understand how it worked. And in fact, there wasn't even parameters back in the day, so I think you actually had to go and create another query that returned a scalar value, and then
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
it
Yeah.
was. And so my recollection from that blog article was that somebody else had written an article about combining files from a folder, and then I went and read that, learned how it worked, and then adapted it for SharePoint. And actually, now I think about it, I reckon what was happening was that we were doing some budgeting at Coke, and those processes were pretty bad back then. They're probably still pretty bad now. And I thought, at least conceptually, we should be able to have months along a spreadsheet along the top, cost center down the side, save the file on SharePoint. Every cost center manager fills in their own form, and then we do a straight file combine. There's your budget.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, this is why I was so excited about these products back then. Was that I know how hard it used to be to do this sort of stuff, particularly with a distributed organization. We were
Yeah.
right around China, Japan, right through to India,
Right.
New
Okay.
Zealand. So we were pretty well distributed. But one thing we had was SharePoint, and so that solution certainly could work there.
I think clearly it had, the biggest impact on the people who were feeling the pain from the existing
Yeah,
world. I was the same sort of thing. And you suddenly read that book, and it's just like, this is talking to me. This is what I end up doing, and this can just make
yeah.
this is just awesome. So
That's right. And I think this is one of the reasons why people who are not necessarily classically trained, but actually have that bent, but also the pain. And
yeah,
so, I think this is one of the reasons why, the MVP program is valuable to Microsoft, because the engineers and the program managers that are building these tools often don't have those real world experiences.
yeah,
And so they're good intentioned, they're good at planning, they're good at building code, but they don't have that experience in the real world. And so if you can, whether it be a Microsoft MVP, or whether it's that power user that works in the organization, or that one guy down at the back dock that knows how to use Excel like nobody else.
yeah,
These
yeah.
people are sort of shiny objects that you can go and talk
Go and
to.
quiz. Yeah, it was a big eye opener
Yeah,
for me when I sort of heard. I think probably Rob or some other people talking about that fact that they didn't, never really worked in business or industry, so they don't really know
yeah,
how the tool is being used. It's just
yeah,
like,
yeah.
wow, that's actually, it's because they're brilliantly smart, but yeah, they just never had the
Mm.
experience. It's just wow, okay.
Different experiences. Yeah.
And are you responsible for the term the Collie Method?
Yes,
Can you claim
yes, I
that?
am.
Are you
Yes,
okay?
I am.
All right.
First
So,
recorded in this book,
in Learn to
Learn to
Write
Write
DAX.
DAX.
Okay.
Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
this front cover designed by my daughter. But yes, I coined the Collie layout methodology for the first time ever in that book. And yeah, I mean, I learned DAX from Rob, and he teaches people to put dimension tables at the top, pivot tables at the bottom, because the filters flow downhill, and whatever filters at the top go down the bottom, but they don't go up the other way. So it just struck a chord with me when I learnt that, and I've been teaching DAX for 8 years now, and I always teach that technique. You know, it doesn't gel with everyone. You don't have to do it. Obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but it makes no difference where the tables are on the diagram view. It doesn't make any functional difference, but it makes a conceptual difference if you're trying to understand what's going on.
Because I love that technique, even to the point that it's sort of almost, I have a visceral reaction if I see it laid out any other way.
Me too. I can't process it.
No, but like the little bit of me that dies in training courses is, at the end of day 2 or whatever, I look at somebody's file and the tables are just laid out everywhere. And I'm just like,
because it didn't gel with.
It did not. The importance of it did not slam home, and it just kills me a little bit.
I'm totally aligned with that. But it made it all the way back to Rob, because maybe it was the last time I was in Seattle, I had a loose end one day, and I went to a training course that Rob was doing. I think it might have been actually with Microsoft, and he was about to talk about the model, and he called it out. I was sitting at the back of the room, and he said, "And Matt, what do we call this technique?"
Nice.
So I think it's found the way back.
Very good. Because you're known for DAX, So where does Power Query sort of fit into the story for you, really?
I mean, look, Power Query is probably 50% of what I do when I do consulting work for people.
Yeah.
So, I talked before about the 3 things. You've got the ETL, which is Power Query. You've got the data modeling DAX, and then you've got the visualization layer. So you actually need to be good at all 3 of them if you want to build end-to-end solutions. Given that most of my customers don't have SQL databases as the back end, Power Query is a much more important solution. I mean, as you know, the simplest form, Power Query, connect to a table.
Yeah.
Connect to a query, and that's it. And it's already been manipulated, and it's nice and clean. Well, if you're in the world where Excel CSV is the source, then you basically have to do that whole ETL yourself, and Power Query has made that significantly easier. It's at least 50% of what I do, and I wouldn't want to do it without it. But I'm actually interested in your views, Win, because the more complex I build, or the more solutions I build that are complex, the more I realize that the current approach has got its limitations. So, where you're getting daily extract files and you're doing file combine, there is a limit. There's a limit, right? And so, I've got a client at the moment that gets a daily. It's a horrible daily text file, and it's think of the file that grows every day, right? So it's got sales in it, and every day it gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Right. But it's a lifetime to date file, right? So it gets bigger, but it's also the numbers in the individual cells are getting bigger because it's adding today's sales against yesterday's sales.
Oh God.
And so the solution that I built using Power Query is it takes the latest version of the file and the second oldest version of the file, and it subtracts them from each other.
Right, yeah.
Leaving the daily sales. Now, in a perfect world, you just go back to them and say, can you just give me this in a table with today's sales? And they say, yeah, sure, here it is. And then it's easy. But, we don't live in a perfect world. And and so I just couldn't imagine how I could build a solution without a tool that would do that.
Yeah.
I'm not even sure how it would have been done in the past. I don't.
Like I say, VBA and crazy stuff. That sort of thing. And does this lead us sort of, for me, Power BI would just be another IT tool if Power Query didn't exist? I don't know where Power BI would be without If it was just sort of the data model and the visualization layer, and you have
Well,
to have a
Power
SQL.
Pivot, it used to be just a data model.
Yes.
So, there's still file load in Power Pivot. You can load a file. You should never do that today's age, but you certainly can just load a table. But it presupposes that the data that you're loading is in some sort of reasonable shape.
Yeah.
Certainly there were lots of people doing Power Pivot training before Power Query was really a mainstream thing.
Yeah, yeah.
But maybe people needed to cleanse the data in Power Pivot. In VBA first.
Yeah.
The other thing that was good about the basic Power Pivot load is that if you had a CSV file with 50 columns and you needed 4, you could just load those 4. So one of the things the Power Pivot data load could do is deselect the columns that you didn't want.
Yes.
And you could also filter the rows that you didn't want. So those two things were a big step forward. Previously you would have had to have opened the file, probably formatted as a table, use some VBA to delete the columns that you didn't need, delete the rows you didn't need, and then save it as a file again. But there's no doubt that Power Query has taken citizen-built BI solutions to the next level.
Yeah.
But of course, it's not only BI solutions, right? So Power Query is a general productivity tool for many different things.
Yes, totally. And I think that from sort of a lot of the YouTube channels and blogs and things or podcasts I listen to, I think people from the IT space who live in the world of SQL databases sort of are quite surprised when they play around with Power Query because they never really have to, because it's all done in other stuff, and then it's sort of like this Power Query thing's this sort of don't really know what it is, or it's a nice to have. But from everywhere I've worked, every client, regardless of the size, we need it because the files are all over the place.
Yeah. So the one limitation that I see, perhaps saying the one limitation is a bit of a oversimplification. Instead of the one limitation, let me say at least one limitation that I see with Power Query as it works with Power BI and Power Pivot is that you must load the results. So there's no concept of temporary storage in Power Query. You can write to a table. Yeah. You can write to a table in Excel. That's obvious. You could save that that table and you could load it from there. But unlike a database, there's no permanent storage. There's no opportunity to run a query and insert records into a table that exists, that has accumulated records in the past. And you can't even. And so a very common pattern that I use in Power Query is daily file combine. After 12 months, I write 365 days of transactions from the production table to a CSV.
Yeah.
Take the 365 Excel files out of the folder and archive them. And then from then on, the next day you're only using 1 file, 2 files, 3 files. And then you append the CSV at the bottom.
Yeah.
But the point is, you can't load that CSV file into your model and have it not refresh.
Yeah.
Like that concept doesn't exist. Every connection has to refresh in order to be able to load the data. So that more traditional database concept of I'll run a SSIS, a SQL Server Integration Services method, or whatever they call it, that takes the source data, inserts the records in their transformed format at the bottom of the table, and then archives the file, and then never have to do that again. That doesn't exist in Power Query today.
No, I think that is a big missing piece. It's what I would call incremental refresh. It would be my, and you get asked about it a lot. It's sort of
So incremental refresh. It's sort of like incremental refresh, and you can get around it today with incremental refresh. But once again, more likely so if you've got a SQL database in the back end.
I'm saying it's sort of
incremental process.
Yes.
Incremental process. There's no such thing as incremental process. No. So Microsoft's recently, in the last 12 months, they've announced these in Power BI. You've got these data warehouse things that you can set up.
Oh, the data mart things.
The data mart, yeah.
Oh yeah,
But
yeah,
it's still the same Power Query
yeah,
with, effectively it's just another staging place before it goes into the model.
yeah, yeah.
There's no true insert
No,
delete.
it'd be nice if they had a sort of just even if it integrated into data flows and they could just say, right, here's my query, refresh and lock or something like that, or
Yeah.
and then it just locked that as a history table.
If you compare two products, so SSIS, SQL Server Integration Services, is a transactional ETL tool that takes an input file, processes it, and inserts the records in a new table, and then it will actually archive the file for you.
Yeah,
So if we talk about the tools that we've got today, you would probably use like a Power Automate to do the moving around of the files, and you can definitely use the Power Query to do the incremental refresh. But what's lacking is the ability to take the results and insert it somewhere for permanent storage.
yeah, yeah.
And so our Power Query models or our Power Query tools tend to be this ever-growing, I've got to process everything, with a few workarounds around incremental refresh, but still no solid concept of a permanent storage.
No, I like that.
The key point is there's no persistent storage in Power Query.
Yeah,
That's the issue. There's no persistent storage in Power BI, which I think is fine if you're a reporting tool, but we need this interim layer where we've got some persistent storage.
it would solve a lot of
Yeah.
challenges.
For me, it's
Yeah,
a
yeah.
missing piece in the puzzle. But
I'm with you.
8 years ago, it was all missing. 35 years ago, we didn't have Excel, or 37. So
Indeed. So
these things get fixed over
things will
time.
get done. What prompted you to get into writing a book then?
Good question. I mean, I unashamedly told Rob Collie, I'm just going to do what you did.
Right.
You seem to have been pretty successful.
Yeah.
So I mean, the things that interest Rob also interest me. I think I got the same. I got the same motivation to solve problems like he did. And I remember speaking to him on the phone just before I quit Coke, saying, "Mate, I think I'm going to quit and do what you do." And he was very supportive. And so I just said, I'm going to create a blog, write a book, do training, do
Right.
consulting. That's what I'm going to do.
Okay.
And so, yeah, so I wasn't that smart. I just found something that looked like it worked and just copied it.
Yeah,
And,
yeah.
so that's why I wrote a book, because Rob had written a book, and I mean, those days there was, one of the things about, well, yeah, that's right. There was a big gap in the market. I really wanted my book to focus on more of an instructional guide on DAX, whereas Rob's book's very comprehensive about what's possible capabilities, but it wasn't really a teaching guide.
Yeah.
I didn't find, once I read the book, I didn't think I couldn't write DAX. That's the bottom line. I read the book, I loved it, it got me inspired, but I got to the end of it and I sat in front of my computer and I thought, I don't know how to do this.
Right. Yeah.
So I deliberately wrote my book with the view of saying, okay, if you're coming from Excel, what do you do? Well, what you do is you read chapter 1 and then you do the practice exercise. Then you read chapter 2 and then you do the practice exercise. And by the time you've read chapter 18, you'll know how to write DAX. So the motivation was the fact that a book can give you some credibility, whether it's justified or not. I guess depends if they've read your book or not. But if you've got a book, it gives you some credibility, and it also helps with your thinking. I didn't realize this at the start, but it really helped me structure my thinking about how to explain stuff.
Yes.
Because if you're going to write it down, you'll learn a lot by teaching someone.
Yes.
You can only get to a certain level to look after yourself, but when you have to explain it to someone else, you go to a different level of understanding.
Yeah.
Or if you don't want to be a nong, which I don't.
Yeah.
So,
Totally.
Yeah, so I've been very lucky with my book. It's been very widely received,
Yeah,
and I'm not even counting the pirate copies that are out there. But
did you actually enjoy writing it, or is it a bit of love hate, or is it?
it was definitely love hate.
Yeah,
I
okay.
mean, I'm not real big at self discipline. I tend to do just where anything that's shiny that I can go and focus on. I'm pretty good at doing that.
Right. Yeah,
When
yeah,
it's time to buckle down and do stuff. Yeah, I find it pretty hard.
yeah.
But Bill Jellin, our mutual publisher, Bill gave me a tip. He just said, work out how many roughly pages. So 250 pages, put today's date, copy it down in Excel, work out how many pages a day. And at the end of
Yeah.
each day, type in how many pages you've written and
Right.
put a chart. And if you're falling behind, get your backside into gear.
There you go. Bit of visualization skills to come
Yeah.
into it as well.
And so, I mean, the reality was I always found it hard to start, but once I started, I found it hard to stop. So I might not do
Yeah.
anything
Okay.
for 3 days and I'd be dreading it. And then I'd say, okay, I've got to do it today, otherwise I'm going to miss the deadline. So I'd start writing and I'd write 50, 80 pages.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then,
Yeah.
and then I'd be exhausted and, edit, copy, repeat.
Yeah.
Mm.
And then how did the Skill Wave sort of partnership come around?
That's also a good question. So, I mean, I've known Ken for a few years. I know Miguel for a few years as well. But I met, can't really remember where I met Ken, but um, Ken and I were in New Zealand together a few years ago, maybe 3 years ago, I'm guessing. I mean, lots happened in the last few
Yeah. Yeah.
years.
Is that where you crashed at
But
Jeff Weir's house?
yeah, well, that was certainly one at the time. So it might have been the time before. It might have been that time. I'm not sure. But anyway, Ken and I mean, I really like Ken, and I always wanted to do something with him. We talked about perhaps doing some training together. We just sort of said, want to do something together, and we sort of left it at that and didn't really think much more about it. But then at some stage, Ken and Miguel Escobar gave me a call and said, do you want to come in and do a JV? I had my own Power Query training prior to that that used to sell okay online video training,
Yeah. Yeah.
and so I agreed to go into partnership. Obviously you mentioned before when that my strength and certainly published or outward facing strength is DAX, because of the things that I've done,
Right.
whereas Ken and Miguel were much more Power Query, and so. It's not. I'm not saying I don't have anything to add in the Power Query space, but obviously I bring in a slightly different view. So yeah, so we got together and we created Skill Wave Training. Where since then Miguel has moved on. He's gone. He's working at Microsoft now.
Yeah.
So
Indeed.
we got one of the good guys in on the inside to work with the other good guys that were already in there. And
Were there debates over the name?
oh, debates over the name. My God, how much time have you got? Now
I can imagine. I can imagine there probably
we
were.
Now, you will not be surprised by this. We literally got spreadsheets full of first names and last names and did a cross join
Right.
and came up with every possibility that we could think of.
Yeah. Yeah.
Knowledge Garden was one that I particularly liked, but
Oh, okay.
wasn't broadly loved by others.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
but yeah, we literally went through. Yeah, it took too much time, multiple weeks to come up with a name.
I like it.
So yeah,
So it was a good call, I reckon.
yeah, no, that's
So,
fine. We're happy with it. So.
and okay, so quick game. I don't know if you've watched any episodes, but I do this little game called Just a Minute, which is a UK radio show where they have to speak
No.
for 1 minute.
Oh
Okay,
God.
so the idea is that whoever's speaking out of me or you at the end of a minute, we take it in turns. Whoever's speaking at the end is the winner. So I'm picking a topic: when to use Power Query versus DAX. Okay, so you're allowed to use the word. You can start or I can start. If I pause or you pause, then the other person buzzes in. Okay.
Okay.
There's one more rule. You're not allowed to use any proper word, like other than the and stuff, more than once. So if you
Oh.
hear me say context transition twice or whatever, you can buzz in and you take over. Okay. So it's a bit of a who's speaking at the end of a minute. Either I can start, and then you can buzz in when you hear me pause or repeat a word.
I think you better start. My
Okay.
strategy is to wait for 5 seconds to the end.
Okay, I will not keep going before I pause, I tell you. So I'm allowed to say the word Power Query multiple times, and I'm allowed to say the word DAX, because that's in the title.
All right.
But otherwise, let me get my little timer up.
All right, so when to use Power Query versus DAX, is that right?
When to use Power Query versus DAX. Any pauses, ums, ahs, long thoughts, you can just buzz in and take over. I'm about 50-50, I think, in terms of win ratio so far.
So it's random.
Pretty much. And I haven't practiced this, I promise. I could do, but that would just be boring. All right, so here we go. Okay, so Power Query is there to transform your data into a nice shape, ready for your reporting, whereas DAX's main purpose is to aggregate and provide a summary of your reports in your visuals on your Power Pivot or Power BI dashboard. The process of pulling in Power Query is using get data, whereas DAX is written using measures. I just said
Okay,
right.
so
I just said I caught myself there. You didn't even buzz in.
yeah, well, I'm sorry. I'm not that fast. Yeah, I was just said,
Okay, right. I'm handing over. Here we go. Ready,
Okay.
steady.
How
go.
much time we got?
You got 23 seconds left.
23 seconds. Okay, one
Okay,
of the important things in Power Query is you can select which columns to keep and which to remove, and also the rows can be chosen using the filter buttons that appear at the top of the page. There's also a number of other...
Oh, Buzz! 58 seconds. Awesome.
Oh.
Got you on 58 seconds. Okay, right. So I've got to go. Power Query is a lot easier to use than DAX. Yes,
Right.
I made it.
Okay, I'll let you win.
Thanks, Matt. Okay, so what new things would you like to see coming? What would be your favorite things in Power BI, Power Query, whatever?
I think from a Power Query perspective, I think it's pretty fully featured. I mean, we've already talked about one important thing that I'd love to see, which is the ability to separate the concept of the processing of the query from the storage of the data. Those two things are intimately tied. I mean, as far as a additional feature that would make a material difference to my life, that's the one. Right. There's something that I'd love to see change that I've asked for multiple times and no one thinks it's a very good idea. I really hate the applied steps on the right-hand side in Power Query. And they've got spaces in the names. And when you look at the M language, the M code that supports those spaces, it has hash, quote, the word, end quote. Now, if you've got the toolbar turned off and you're an Excel user, I get that it's human readable language, and so I understand the thought process that went into that. But as soon as you want to go to the next level, it just makes the code so much harder to read and understand than it needs to be. So I would love to see a little toggle in the settings that says use camel case instead of spaces in your applied steps name. Okay. And stated differently, I bet you there's no one that writes M code by hand that does hash quotes in order to put spaces in their names.
Yeah, I think that's probably pretty safe.
So I understand Microsoft's trying to make a trade-off between supporting business users the way that they normally think, but I just think it is possible for people to move into M language, and I'd love to have the choice to have camel case or underscores, I don't care, but so that we can get rid of that space character.
Would an ideal world be that the applied steps had spaces, but the M code automatically got rid of them?
That's
just so
fine
that
by me as
just
well.
so the applied steps are sort of But no,
Yeah.
I know what you mean.
Or
I
it
know.
doesn't have to
Yeah,
be
yeah.
camel case. So maybe it
No,
can be an underscore character, and then when it renders in the applied steps, it shows as a space instead of an underscore. I
yeah,
could live with that as well.
yeah.
Um,
No,
I just think it would make it easier
yeah.
for everyone.
I
So
think so. It looks less scary.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So that's the one thing that I can think of. I think Power Query is pretty fully featured.
yeah. Power BI wise,
I haven't really
anything
thought
in
about
particular?
Power BI. I mean, I think the visualization engine, needs work. They obviously spent a lot of time over the last few years working on enterprise deployment things, which needs to be done for it to be a mainstream solution. I don't think there's enough work being done on the visualization layer.
Yeah,
If you look at a tool like Tableau, so Tableau was successful because it was basically a visualization tool. So it was actually developed by the same people that worked in Pixar Studios. So
oh, okay,
they're graphical
right.
experts,
Yeah,
and so the reason Tableau has been trumped somewhat by Power BI and is that or by Microsoft more broadly is that Microsoft worked on the DAX modeling engine first. I got that right. Then they worked on the ETL engine second, Power Query, and arguably got that right.
yeah,
And very early on, they had those two layers, and the third layer, the visualization layer, was horrible. I remember when Power BI first came out, general availability, 2015, I want to say, something like that, July
yeah,
2015.
yeah.
Um, you couldn't even do a text wrap on a column in a matrix.
Yes.
So if the column was too wide, I'm not even sure whether you could make it smaller. I don't even think you could make it smaller.
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
I mean, it was so
It's an afterthought.
there,
Yeah,
yeah. Well, they had a long way to go. So was the reality,
yeah,
and so I think they need to spend some time and money on the visualizations now.
which the
Um,
murmurings on Twitter and things sounds like that's happening. So,
well, that's good.
which is good. So,
Yeah, so that's what I'd like to see happen in Power BI.
awesome. And one of the requirements for coming on to Power Query Magic is to leave a link to your most popular and your favourite blog post, article, video, whatever. So,
Yeah.
what are you gonna leave with us?
Well, I did do a little bit of research before we started here today, and my most popular blog is actually, or certainly my most popular Power Query article was called "Remove Duplicates and Keep Last Record."
Okay.
And I didn't look at the date, but I'll send you the link, of course. But it's probably 5 or 6 years old, and it's in my top 10 of all time
Right.
blog articles. I think it's had
Yeah,
like
yeah.
700,000 views or something like
Wow.
that.
Okay. Yeah,
And
yeah.
but what it does is, when you have a table of let's say 1 million records in Power Query, if you say if you try and remove duplicates, if you sort it based on the date column first to give you the most recent record, and then remove duplicates, you would think that we would complete the sort process first, then remove the duplicates. I mean,
Yes.
logic would suggest
Yeah,
that,
yeah,
but it's not how it works.
yeah.
And so you actually, and the solution uses a buffer function to force Power Query to load the entire table before it does the removal step.
Yes.
And so, and it came about, as did much of my blog fodder, came about because I had a problem that I came across and I couldn't work out why it was a problem. And then I had to do some R&D and learn. And then once I learned, I wrote about it
Yeah.
and share it. And then obviously other people have had the problem as well, at least 700,000 of them. And
Indeed.
and so that's why they read them. But also,
Yeah.
the other thing about my blogs is sometimes there's processes. I'll give you a good example. There's one process that I use many times, and that's when, let's say you've got an employee table with a start date and an end date. Right?
Oh,
They're
yeah.
employed on this date and they terminate on that date. So there are 2 date columns, and you're trying to say how many staff did I have every month?
Yes. Yes. Yes.
Well, it's not a simple modeling solution because you've got two two date columns. You can't create relationships. You can, but one of them's got to be inactive. Anyway, how do you solve that problem? And you can do it with virtual relationships using filter function in DAX. But you have to think through the logic. I want this column to be greater than or equal to that column, or the min of this column, the max of that column. And every time I used to solve this problem, I'd have to go back to first principles and reinvent it again, because I could never process the logic freely in my brain. I'd always have to go and build a little sample table and do the testing, work out the logic, and then I could write the DAX code. And so I said, this is stupid. So I wrote a blog article about it, shared it with everyone else, hard documented the actual steps to do the thinking and the examples. And then every time I come across that problem, I just go straight back to my blog and copy what I wrote. So so that's the other reason absolutely. So that was my most popular. Probably one of my favorites. I wrote an article about how to build a Power Query calendar table from scratch. So just basically starting from a blank query and build a Power Query calendar table. And one of the reasons I like it, I mean, there's insert year, month, all that sort of stuff. And there's a few little tips and tricks, but a little bit of M code in there as well. So, going into the apply step and hard coding a start date, working out today's date to find out the end date, but then hard coding a bit of code to say, will take you through to the end of the year, because it's good practice to do that. And so just a bit of a mismatch of different techniques, all in that one article. So I'll send you links to both of those.
Excellent.
My most popular and my favorite.
In the show notes. And then sort of wrapping things up, I like to ask my guests if they've ever had any brushes with fame. Have you met any famous people?
I haven't. I mean, I haven't met too many famous people, but there are two people that I think I wouldn't ask that question. So one is Jeffrey Wang, Jeffrey Wang from Microsoft, who certainly, well, I'm not sure whether he was truly the father of DAX, but he might not have been the father, but he was certainly there when it was conceived. So, I was really starstruck to meet Jeffrey. He's such a nice guy. And then the other person that I've met that was, perhaps before I was doing this work, was Stephen Covey. And so I'm a real fan of the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and so he wrote that book, and I went to a seminar back in the day at Coke when we had plenty of money to send us to seminars, and we had a backstage meet and greet. So that was an enjoyable opportunity for me.
Very cool. And from chatting, when I chatted to Lars Schreiber on this podcast, he sort of was talking about one of his worst presentation moments. So that triggered off a bit of a theme. So any horrible nightmare presentation sessions?
You said we haven't got much time left, right?
But,
Look, the one that comes to mind. So Martin Kirby, he was when I was at Coke, he was my account manager. He was working at Microsoft. And so I knew him before I went into business myself. And he asked me, when he was working at Microsoft, he asked me to come and present to one of Microsoft customers. It was a government department. I don't remember which one, maybe New South Wales Water or something like that. So I had all my presentation done, and I was all ready to go. And we're into the room and had my laptop warmed up and ready to go. I got a feeling it might have been a Mac running Parallels at the time, but that's perhaps part of the problem, but another story. And I plugged in the HDMI cable and blue screen of death, and it did not recover. I could not get my laptop working again. And so the room full of people, Martin's brought in this guy to show everyone. I was ready to go, and I got a feeling I might have used Martin's laptop to access some online files, were not the exact ones, and it was horrible. I haven't heard from him since, so, I guess that says something about that. But terrible.
That's a good one. And then finally, I'm going to strand you on a desert island. You're allowed to take one item, luxury, whatever, with you, but it must begin with a letter M in honor of the M language. So what would you take?
So I struggled a little bit because if I'm only allowed one thing, like, my iPad's not going to work. It doesn't start with M, but that's another problem.
Nah.
But if I don't have internet, and I've got my SpaceX internet now, which I could actually take. Well, I wouldn't have power, I guess, so that's another issue. And I'm really struggled. I don't know what I'd do on an island. I don't want to be stranded on an island. Is the truth. But I think as a bit of a one word, my dog.
Okay.
So if I can get around it, I'd take my dog, and it's that's camel case.
Camel, because you've written it camel case, I'll allow it. I've disallowed my something in the past, but I will allow it.
Yeah, okay. Well, I didn't know that, but
so you wouldn't fashion some golf clubs out of a stick and a coconut.
I don't know. Maybe I took the question too seriously because I have these flashbacks of Wilson on a beach with
not your cup of tea. That
I think it would be terribly depressing to be on your own
on
like
a
that,
permanent thing. Yeah, we need a bit of the socials.
Yeah, I think so. So yeah,
all good.
Anyway,
no, all right. Appreciate the chat, Matt. Appreciate you taking the
Thanks,
time
Win.
to chat.
Yeah, appreciate the opportunity to catch up. Yeah,
great to have a catch up, and we'll hopefully catch up in person at some point soon. And I will keep sharing the magic of DAX and Power Query with everyone, and we'll catch you later on.
Yeah, thanks, Win.